Good evening. Welcome to the 5-8, where we discuss each of the week's 5 most fucked up topics for 8 minutes. 5 topics, 8 minutes, 2 hosts, a guest. Actually, tonight we have 2 guests.
2.
Some singing, a lot of curse words, and as many cocktails as we deem necessary. LB, how are you?
I'm fine.
You have no cocktail.
I just realized I left it in the other room. It's just a glass of water. I'll get it. I'm sure we'll have a break here at some point.
Okay.
And I'll go run and get my drink. What are you having?
I'm having a White Russian. Huh? Because, yeah, for obvious reasons. It's a Russian themed, at least the first segment, Russian themed.
Yeah. It seems to be we're back. Same as it ever was.
Same as it ever was.
Yeah, we're stuck in the Talking Head song for sure.
Yeah, this is not my beautiful house. That's not your beautiful house. You're on the road.
It's not my beautiful house. It's someone else's beautiful house. No, I'm actually traveling for a little bit of work, so I was graciously offered a table to have for tonight. So different location, beautiful. I don't know what's going to happen with the light in here, but you guys all stick with me. I'm sorry, I'm a little orange. It's just the way it is.
That's also thematic, I think, to the show.
I think that's thematic too.
Yeah. Speaking of the orange one, I don't know if you saw this, but there was a little bit of an announcement right before we came on.
I did not.
He's picked his vice president.
Oh my God.
Hannibal Lecter is going to be his vice president.
Oh, Hannibal.
That's it. Hannibal Lecter's running. Less dangerous than J.D. Vance, for sure.
For sure. And certainly less dangerous than Elise Stefanik.
Yeah.
And less grotesque in some ways.
Now, we were talking about this because he's mentioned Hannibal Lecter like a number of times. And I think I figured it out. I'm not even joking.
Okay. You've cracked the Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah, I think I cracked it. He's seen the movie recently. And he's watched to the end because he's mentioned the line, "You're going to have an old friend for dinner." I think he's finally now figured out what that line means and what Hannibal Lecter's referring to with the line. I think someone finally, maybe Ivanka sat him down and explained what's happening there, that they're going to dine upon the old friend like it's a brain worm eating of Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s brain. You know, that's what's going to happen. So,
okay.
Yeah.
I think that's probably pretty right. I do think the constant mentioning of cannibalism and celebrating a fictional horrific cannibal monster, is also a way to just sort of say, can this be red meat? Can we, it's the whole, there is no bottom. We're going to keep sinking lower until, cult tactic of just getting all these people to abandon any of their sense of morality or any kind of internal line that, he keeps pushing them off that cliff.
Maybe it has to do with the 10 Commandments.
Cliff.
The 10 Commandments thing also in Louisiana, because the 10th commandment, the last one is, what do we covet? We covet what we see every day. Covet is the only time I've ever heard the word covet used ever is in Silence of the Lambs, right?
Oh. And
the Bible.
The Bible.
But like people don't walk around saying that. You know what I covet? I covet that car. No one talks like that. Even Trump doesn't talk like that.
No, now he'll start talking about coveting because someone will have to explain this to him, and he'll have to understand that word.
He will not. All right, we should get started because
let's get started.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to set the timer for our first segment. Which is our first segment, Greg Olear?
It's Hermitage, and the Hermitage is located in St. Petersburg, Russia Federation, and there's some news that came out about that place this week. So you wanted to talk about that up front. So what's on your mind about that?
I did, because when the news broke, and this is from a letter that Senator Whitehouse and Senator Wyden sent to Merrick Garland saying, you need to investigate Clarence Thomas in these gifts. This is actually pretty serious. And a list of all the gifts and everything. And then kind of buried in there, you get to, and some journalists plucked it out and go, uh-oh. In 2003, Harlan Crow, it appears, sponsored a bribed Clarence Thomas, what part of the bribery scheme, paid for him to have a luxury yacht trip to Russia. And then once he was there, he got on a helicopter and went to, and I can't say the name of the palace,
Yusupov Palace.
Rasputin's palace, right?
No. Where Rasputin was executed.
Oh, where he was executed, right.
Unfortunately, not where Putin was executed, just Rasputin.
Just Rasputin.
Yeah.
But Putin's favorite place, right? In his hometown in St. Petersburg, not long after he had ascended to president. This is 2003. Putin became president of Russia in 2000 after the 1999 apartment bombings. So Clarence Thomas, and then somebody, Harlan Crow, paid, but it would have had to have been cleared. You're flying in airspace to this castle, this palace. And so he got all these trips. This isn't just a normal trip. Like this is something that would have been, he was a sitting justice at the time. Let's remember, his confirmation hearing was 1991. So he was a solid 12 years on the bench at this point. Yeah. And so this is a big U.S. figure, huge figure in the U.S. As a sitting Supreme Court justice is coming to Russia, to Putin's hometown via Harlan Crow, for some reason, felt the need to send him there. And it was luxury all the way, baby. Those yachts, let us remind everybody, those yachts, especially the yachts as they're coming into Russia, they're pretty wired up.
No.
They're pretty wired up. I don't think it was a long time ago, I was like interacting with a guy that would outfit the yachts. And he's like, oh God, yeah, there's cameras in every room. But depending on who's it, you just don't know it. But, for security purposes, the whole thing, even if it's not nefarious, they know who's going in what room when all times of the day and what's going on in there. So we'll assume, presumably, we have no direct proof of this, wired up yacht with Clarence and Ginny.
Was Ginny there? Do we know that Ginny was there?
Actually, I don't know that Ginny was there.
Yeah.
I didn't see that. I'm presuming that as well. So.
Oh, I'm presuming the opposite. It's funny
maybe
how
she wasn't
presumptions
there.
are,
Maybe
the old saying,
floating Bohemian Grove to the Kremlin. Okay, so I wanted to just run through a little thought experiment.
Yes.
Just a little thought experiment with everybody. And just sort of remind people, because what I find is that Americans have a very, very, very difficult time even remembering that you need to sort of step into your adversary's shoes and think like they do in order to understand and assess potential threats, especially when it comes to this kind of thing that we're talking about now. So as I mentioned, I don't think anyone in their right mind, if they're properly reporting on this or investigating it, or even looking into it as is being asked by these two senators of Merrick Garland and Justice Department to do, there isn't anybody in justice, certainly no one that has any experience in intelligence. And if you're above the FBI, FBI has quite a big counterintelligence operation. It's not plausible that the Kremlin wouldn't have known and Putin wouldn't have known that a Supreme Court justice is coming. So that's going to be a known thing, whether this was their guy already, or perhaps this trip was an opportunity that could be fruitful. Okay. So there's just some known knowns to go through about our adversary, our Russian adversary, right? Formerly Soviet Union. And this wasn't too far from we're talking that confirmation hearing for Clarence Thomas in 1991 is happening pretty much the first year that Soviet Union is Russia, right? George Bush appointed him, right? But Clinton's about to take over. It's that whole thing. Okay. Okay. And just as a reminder, this is only the second Black justice, which is a big attention-getting thing. This was broadcast, and we're an open society. So we broadcast over the airwaves for anybody anywhere in the world to see what we're doing with our society. As even at the level of, we're all going to have an open hearing now, a Senate confirmation hearing for the next Supreme Court justice, who happens to be Black, which was a big monumental thing, a Black American, who was succeeding Thurgood Marshall, the first Black American ever on the court, who was this big figure. So if you're the Kremlin, or any foreign intelligence, there's no way you're not aware of that confirmation hearing and the significance of this person, and that this person is a justice on the Supreme Court, and what the Supreme Court means. What does the Supreme Court mean if you're in Russia? Well, it means that you've been hearing for a couple centuries, right? Even when the Soviet Union and before that, the Tsarist regime, about this thing called the Constitution. Constitution, 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 Constitution. Democracy, 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 democracy. Now, Russia as it is today, and certainly the Soviet Union before, had their version of courts, right? We can call them whatever we want to call them. They're not, the idea of a justice system and justices in a Supreme Court is not a foreign idea that no one could ever wrap their minds around, this uniquely American thing. That's not in the realm of possibility either. So we have an adversary that was our biggest adversary, and we had a Cold War with them for decades. They've just come out of that. They are very, very aware of our Constitution, that's the underpinnings of our democracy. Those are our laws of which we choose to be governed by. And that the people who are there to protect and uphold the Constitution, and not just everyone that takes an oath, but very specifically those 9 Supreme Court justices, that court is special here. It means something here that's profound and intricately essential, woven in and essential to our democracy going forward. So if you want to topple the United States, you better put your sights on that fucking court. Because you have to then throw away the very barriers that are in place to protect the democracy. And the only place you can do that is, yes, changing laws, but those are going to end up in front of the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is going to choose whether or not to uphold those laws or reverse them. That's the process. That's how it goes, right? Especially when it comes to rights, all of that. That court is the holy grail of compromise for any of our adversaries if their goal is toppling our democracy. Who in that era, who could it have been, Greg Olear? Which country could it have been in that era, and even to today, who was the premier nation when it came to human intelligence and turning people in their targeted nations, their adversary nations, turning them, influencing them, either through blackmail, through, sexual blackmail, a lot of that. Like, who could it be, Greg? Who could it be?
Well, it's not Canada, right?
It's not Canada.
Not Canada.
It's not even us. It's not us.
It's not us.
Our heads of intelligence, they will all admit that. For human intelligence, there was only one. Chef's kiss, best of the best.
Yeah.
And of course, it was exactly where Harlan Crow sent Clarence Thomas, on a yacht and then a chopper.
Yeah, it's the Kremlin, it's the Soviet intelligence services, the Russian intelligence services. Yeah. Now,
there is no universe that exists where if that man wasn't compromised already, he wasn't the number one target of compromise as soon as he was within their grasp. Right?
Yeah.
And how easy of a mark is that? Because just 10 years, 12 years prior, they watched, along with the rest of the world, us discuss how this man took his pubic hairs and put them on soda cans in order, because he was deviant, so deviant that he did this with his coworkers and his subordinates.
Yeah.
And that a very brave woman stood up and said, This man cannot be a Supreme Court justice. What was missing in that is not just because he doesn't have the character and the morality, and he's an abuser and he's corrupt and morally corrupt and deviant and disgusting and horrible. And he harassed me at a level that, you don't hear about stories like that. That was bad, right? Not only that, I wish what had been put into the discourse at that time is like, holy fucking shit, he's the biggest target for any kind of foreign influence compromise there could be out there. We cannot have a Supreme Court justice that is compromised, not just by capitalism and greed, like the Koch brothers and the Heritage and all that, which we'll get to in a bit, but actually because he's such a broken person. He's such a weak man. I mean, this must have been the most delicious delivery by yacht and then chopper that ever came in. You can see the drool. You can imagine the like, oh my God, give him to us. So I'm not saying anything happened. I'm just saying there's no universe in which something wasn't attempted. Yep. Doesn't exist. Doesn't exist. Yep. And we must start looking at this information in that way and demanding investigation and demanding accountability. We have to. Too much is at stake.
Now, to be fair, Harlan Crow does collect weird shit from these Iron Curtain countries, just like he collects the Nazi memorabilia. So I think maybe they were just going on a little shopping spree so he could buy old decommissioned Stalin statues. And Clarence has a good eye for Stalin statues. And that sounds less plausible.
That sounds less. Here's a fun fact, and then we'll move on. Fun fact about Harlan Crow, right? Fun fact about him. So Marjorie Merriweather Post, who is the one that built Mar-a-Lago, right? And it went from her to she gave it away to the U.S. like the government, and Jimmy Carter said, "This is too elaborate. We don't need a Southern blah blah blah," and Donald Trump bought it. That's the pathway of that piece of property. But she also had and also her husband was the first ambassador to where? Right?
I'm going to guess Russia. I'm going to go with Russia.
The
and
Soviet
the art collection.
Union. The Soviet Union. So after the Tsar fell and the Soviet Union was formed, her husband was the first ambassador. And the only reason he was chosen is because of her. She was the wealthiest woman in the world, wealthiest person in the world, and very, very powerful and had access into everything. So she called herself the first lady, right, of the first ambassador to Soviet Union. Okay? Got it, everybody? That was the largest collection of Russian art outside of Russia, was her collection, and she housed it all at Mar-a-Lago, with the tunnels and everything. Remember all that, right? Everybody got that? So she had another big property. She liked to build these big properties. She, especially after her husband, it's like her second husband, I think. And that is, guess what? Guess who bought that one? Up where I live. It became known as the Bohemian Grove. It was in that picture. It wasn't the Bohemian Grove, but it was in that picture.
Oh, Harlan Crow.
Harlan Crow.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know, just data points.
Just data points. Data points.
Just data points.
Okay, good. That's a lot to chew on. Lot to chew on. We got to move on. We got to move on. As much as we would like to talk more about Clarence Thomas, I don't want to talk anymore about Clarence Thomas.
No, but that should have been front page news.
Yeah, well, it isn't, right, because Joe Biden has a stutter. So why would it be? Okay, anyway, we'll talk about that later too. Okay, so hit the timer.
It's on.
It's on. Okay, I wanted to talk briefly about Project 2025 because finally it's in the news, and this is I'm delighted that people know what this is. Like, even, one of my kids was like, "Have you heard of this Project 25?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I know a thing or two about that." Yeah. So it's making the TikTok rounds. Like, it's a rally. People know what it is. And I wanted to I read the foreword that Kevin Roberts, who is the head of the Heritage Foundation. He is a radical Catholic in the Leonard Leo mold. We'll talk about Leonard Leo in a minute too. In that kind of mold. And he's the one that put all this stuff together. And I read the foreword that he wrote for this tome. And I just 10 takeaways. I have them in my book. I want to just read, not the book, just the takeaways real quick. And then we'll move on. So these are takeaways from what they want to do. Okay. So the first thing is that straight married families with children will enjoy favored status. That's there. The family is over and over again in this thing. It's the family. It's the family. It's the family. By the family, they don't mean the mafia, although maybe they do. They really mean like, man, wife, kids, picket fence, that shit. So anybody that doesn't conform to that sort of stereotypical view of family, not that important. Second thing, gay, lesbian, non-binary individuals will be stripped of their civil rights. That's obvious. That's coming. These people hate gay people. They hate them. I mean, we say homophobic, but they have hatred for them in a way that's real, and they don't think that they should be allowed to be around kids. And this is the drag queen thing comes from that too. Third thing, this is important. Pornography will be outlawed. They are going to come for the porn.
God.
They're going to come.
Can we take their computers?
I think the Kremlin has them already. So what he says, this is what he writes: the people who produce and distribute porn should be imprisoned. Educators and public librarians who purvey it should be classified as registered sex offenders, and telecommunications and technology firms that facilitate its spread should be shuttered. So this is bad for a number of different reasons, starting with, first of all, good luck banning porn, dude. That's never going to fucking happen. But also the fact that some government entity can then say what is and is not porn and go after people for it is very, very dangerous. And to the degree of like, this is a huge telecommunications firm. No, there's porn there. It's like, you're a terrorist. Come with me to get, they just take all your rights away. So on that thing, the fourth thing, trans individuals will be targeted for basically eradication. They do not like trans people at all. And Roberts even says he writes pornography, manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, which is a weird way for somebody to, a weird clause to have after the word pornography. It's not something that I consider pornographic. I don't know, Kevin Roberts. The fifth thing, blastocysts, zygotes, and embryos have more rights than women. They're all about the unborn, maybe the undead too. I don't know. It's very strange, but women are basically fucked under this plan. I mean, really, we're joking about it, but it's not a joke. Number 6, women can and should die in childbirth. So this is the most ominous sentence in the thing. Conservatives should ardently pursue these pro-life and pro-family policies while recognizing the many women who find themselves in immensely difficult and often tragic situations and the heroism of every choice to become a mother. So what I read into that is they're not going to protect anybody's life. They're just going to be like, she died in childbirth.
She's a martyr.
A great hero. She's a martyr.
Yeah.
That's happening. That's already happening in some of these states. Number 8, people talk about this a lot. The administrative state should be dismantled. That's coming. They're going to fire 50,000 people on day one. Yeah. All of the shit that we rely on.
Not just people, civil employees.
Civil servants, yeah.
Civil servants.
That do things like make sure the checks for Social Security go out and make sure that the food that we eat is passes inspection and stuff like that. Yeah. 9, wanting to ensure that the planet can sustain human life after 2050 is extremism. That's what they think. And number 10.
Wait, say that one again.
Okay, no, if you want to help with climate change, they consider anybody that's basically environmentalist to be an extremist and anti-people and anti-capitalism and all this kind of stuff. Like they don't, it's very short-sighted. And the last thing is everyone should have the right to discriminate against anyone or anything because free speech, because, they have the same misunderstanding of what free speech is as like Elon Musk does on that health site. So anyway, I wanted to highlight these things because there's a lot of information now out there that's more specific, but these are things that will happen if Trump is elected. They will happen. So anybody, if people are on the fence about in your family, in your friend circle, I don't know what to do. If they have people in their lives who are gay, those people are going to lose rights. If they have people that are trans, they might get taken away from their parents. Like there's real things are going to happen.
Real things. And they really go into detail about how to use the Justice Department and what type of past laws to resurface, to weaponize and aim not just to take away the rights, but to criminalize and put people in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really scary and it's awful. And it's not people aren't exaggerating when they're, talking about it.
If
also,
anything, they're playing it down.
Yeah. I'll add that if JD Vance is the VP choice, that's a really, 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 really ominous thing. He's by far the most dangerous of all of the candidates. He is a Peter Thiel, puppet, and he is very much into the Red Caesar dictator thing. So he seems really wishy-washy, and he's got the eyeliner, and he seems like not very dangerous, but he's extremely, extremely dangerous in my opinion. Anyway, that's all I've got. So, boy,
let's lighten it up a little bit.
There is one thing. One thing we can do.
Well, Donald Trump got all the Catholic freaks, the fascist jerks and the right-wing geeks. Heritage wrote a book, what they'll do if we elect the crook. They'll protect the unborn, and they'll take away your pawn. They're the Christian Taliban, the New York Times don't understand. Woman is an object in Trump's project, 22.5, 22.5. If you're gay, take your rights away, Project 22.5, 22.5. Fascist handbook, 22.5, 22.5. Donald Project, 22.5. It's Donald Trump's Project 2025.
He's such a better dancer when Chunk animates him.
I know. Yeah, Chunk for the win. That was a good one. That was a good one. He
one.
also added backing vocals, which is also awesome.
Yes.
So,
he's just the best.
Yeah. No, but you said I was like, okay, what's a song that has a rhyme with 5 in it? And I went through, and that's the first one that I thought of. So, and that's it. Okay, we've kept our guest waiting long enough. He worked in Washington for many years. First as a reporter, and then in PR. He did media relations and worked for the government at USCIRF, which is the U.S. Commission for Religious Freedom. And while he was there, a political appointee came in who became kind of his boss, whose name is Leonard Leo. And for many years now, also, he has been sort of independently covering the Leonard Leo beat, banging the drum at a time when few people were banging the drum. Tom Carter. Welcome to the 5-8. How are you?
Good, great. Thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So we talked about Clarence and Project 2025, up front. Do you want to comment on any of those things before we get to the Leonard Leo stuff?
Stephanie talking about the Clarence trip in 2003 to Russia. Leonard first came on my radar in research in 2004. Harlan Crow, Leonard Leo, and a guy named Greg Mueller at CRC ran the swift boating of John Kerry in 2004. And that was the first time that I knew of that that band got together. Turns out they were a garage band even before that. So, I'm not surprised, but it's just interesting to me that they've been together, working their nefarious deeds for a long 20 years now. So
too long. I think too long is the answer. And of course, Clarence Thomas is like the godfather of the Leonard Leo entire movement.
Well, Clarence and Jenny would be the Holy Father and the Holy Mother of the sort of Leonard Leo organization here in Washington, D.C.
So okay, let's talk. I did a little bit of an introduction, but talk a little bit more about your background and what you were doing and how you came into the orbit of this weirdo.
Okay, I was at the Beckett Fund for Religious Liberty, which is also a Leonard Leo org. I mean, he's on the board there. He wasn't when I was there, but it's part of the sort of Catholic world. It's, you may know them from Hobby Lobby, which basically banned the Obamacare from people getting contraceptives. Hobby Lobby didn't want to give their employees contraceptives, and so they challenged at the Supreme Court, Becket Fund, and they won. This was after I was there. We parted after I was there for a year because they were crazy against same-sex marriage, and I'm kind of crazy in favor of it. And so we weren't really a good fit. But I left amicably, and the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom was looking for somebody to do PR, and I had a good record at the Becket Fund. I got good recommendations, and I got hired. That's the first time I ever heard of Leonard Leo. A couple of months after I was there, basically they ran out the executive director who hired me, because he was sane and the commissioners were not. And anyway, Leonard became the de facto executive director, boom, overnight. And his very first action as executive director was to fire a young Muslim woman who basically for being Muslim. It was a 5-year lawsuit. Eventually, USCIRF lost the lawsuit, and I don't know all the details, but it was found in her favor that she was fired for being a Muslim. The U.S.
discrimination. Yeah.
The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom fired a woman for being Muslim, and that was Leonard Leo's doing. If you look at the lawsuit, it's blamed on a woman, Nina Shea, who is also a pretty big deal in the Catholic world here in D.C., human rights and so forth, because she wrote emails that, basically convicted her. But it could not have happened. It absolutely could not have happened without Leonard Leo doing it. It was his decision to make. If all the rest of the commissioners had come up against him, it was still his anyway, and that's sort of where he lost me. I was able to work with him on religious freedom issues. I mean, the commission dealt with things like Baha'is being persecuted in Iran and Jehovah's Witnesses being persecuted in Russia, things like that. I mean, who's not, for saying, well, let these people practice their religion. But when that happened, I said, I can't work with this guy. And it was at that point I began going to reporters and saying, you need to look at him. I didn't really know very much about him at that time, but it was pretty quick that it became evident what he was up to. A few months later, Talking Points Memo, Josh Marshall wrote an article that Leonard was the signing official for Jenny Thomas's new Liberty Central. And then David Korn of Mother Jones wrote a story about Leonard and Jenny basically opposing what was called the Ground Zero Mosque in New York in 2010. When that kind of media heat came on him and Jenny, they basically ditched Liberty Central and they changed the name. And it was years later we found out through Heidi Presbala at Politico that what this was about was in preparation for Citizens United, which was a couple of months down the road. And Leonard was actually really the first person to take advantage of this whole dark money thing and the whole floodgates of dark money that opened up. The Citizen United opened up. So anyway, during that period of time that I started asking reporters or telling them, this is an interesting guy. He's got, Liberty Central and, another group, Roger Severino, who is at the Heritage Foundation writing all this anti-woman, anti-gay stuff. His wife, Carrie Severino, was picked and groomed and put in position for the Judicial Crisis Network, which is basically Leonard's public relations organization to attack or to support Supreme Court judges. And they have spent nearly today $600 million getting the 600, going back to Roberts and Alito, which Leo got onto the Supreme Court, and then Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. A lot of money, a lot of dark money went to get these people on the Supreme Court.
How much of the money went to the beer for Brett Kavanaugh? Though?
I like beer.
I actually have a question about the money. So, okay. With Citizens United, nothing has to be disclosed and blah, 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 blah.
Right.
And there was dark money coming in to create the dark money free pass, right? So did you have was there ever any reporting at all looking at whether, was it all just presumed to be Koch money or Harlan Crow or these sort of weirdo billionaires, mysterious billionaires, that were American? Or was there as well any look of is any of this money coming in from foreign nations or sovereign funds or anything like that?
Well, let me clarify. Basically, when Leonard and I clashed in 2009, 2010, 2011, it's a lot of inside Washington baseball and how the sausage is made, so to speak. But January 3rd, 2012, he called me into his office and said, "Well, Tom, your job has been eliminated." So they basically figured out a way to get rid of me. So since 2012, I've only been privy. That was my last face-to-face with him. Last time I talked with him, I've only been privy to what's been published. Right. There's a few people that have done some very, very good work. A guy named Robert McGuire in DC has done some good work. Lisa Graves, who you've had on your show, her people have done some excellent work. Lisa, by the way, is brilliant. I mean, she's just completely different level. Basically, what I know is what has been printed in the media, and frankly, there hasn't been very much.
Yeah, so that's what I was asking. So anything you're aware of, because I know you watch it so carefully.
Well, there's a couple, Neil and Ann Corkery, who are Opus Dei Catholics. They were the money bags for Leonard at the Judicial Crisis Network. Okay. I don't know exactly. They're wealthy independently, but there's so much money involved. It didn't all come from them. You asked about international. A couple of years ago, before in 2022, was when the Barry Side money, 1.6 billion, was given to Leonard. And after that, there's been a huge amount of reporting. Prior to that, the only really good reporting on the dark money was Jay Michelson wrote a story for Daily Beast in 2018. I was one of the sources for that, but Robert McGuire was the money source for that. And they said Leonard had spent, up until that point, I think it was, in the Daily Beast story, I don't remember exactly how much money they talked about. But then the next year, the Washington Post did a story, 2019, where a very good story, good foundation work on what Leonard was doing, and they said he had spent $250 million at that time. There was no follow-up. There was zero follow-up on that story. That should have broken the dam and made reporters start looking. Also in 2019, Carl Hulse of the New York Times, the bureau chief of the New York Times in Washington, D.C. This was after Kavanaugh was put on the court. He wrote a book about Kavanaugh and how all the inner workings on the Hill, some very good stuff, but he barely mentioned Leonard Leo. But in his book tour, he mentioned on a number of occasions, well, yeah, there's a Catholic mafia in Washington, D.C. I contacted him and said, Carl, we need to sit down and talk about this Catholic mafia. We had a few emails back and forth, but then he stopped answering my emails. He wasn't comfortable with me saying the New York Times needs to be covering the Catholic mafia. Going back to 2012, I have a neighbor, Robert Draper, who is a reporter at the New York Times today. He would walk his dog, come past my house, and we got to talking. I didn't know who he was. He was just some guy walking his dog. And one day he was wearing a Jon Stewart Daily Show hat. And I said, where'd you get that? And he goes, well, I was on the show last night or the night before. I was like, well, who the fuck are you anyway? Yeah. And he said, well, you know, I wrote a book, you know, and I was on there. Jon Stewart had me on my book. I said, well, if you're interested in politics in DC, how about Leonard Leo? And he said, no, I can't do that. I basically pestered him. I nagged him for 2, 3, 4 years to do a story about Leonard Leo. And finally, he came back to me and said, I can't do a story about Leonard Leo because my fiance, soon to be wife, is a far-right extremist Catholic hooked up with the Corkeries, hooked up with Leonard Leo, and it would embarrass her. And so I can't write that story.
So he can't do journalism.
Can't do journalism, exactly.
Got it.
So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why people didn't do the Leonard Leo story. I would say the biggest one is the New York Times didn't take it seriously because Washington, D.C. news it's pack journalism. It's a lot like a high school lunchroom. Did you ever see the movie Mean Girls?
Yeah.
And where the new girl, Lindsay Lohan, gets the map of the lunchroom, and the AV kids are over here, and the athletes are over there, and the cool kids sit over there. Be careful of the cool kids, because if they don't like you, they'll ruin your life. Well, in DC, the elite reporters are the cool kids. And if they are not interested in something, no one else is interested in it. And if they had done something, there's every possibility that Leonard Leo would not be the phantom that he is even today. When Dobbs was announced, I live a few blocks from the Supreme Court. When Dobbs was announced, I walked up there just to watch the demonstration, get my fair share of abuse. And I had a T-shirt on that said, had a picture of Trump on it. It said "Pinche pendejo," which means in Spanish, fucking asshole. Yeah. And some reporters saw that and went, oh, quote, let's go get a quote from that guy. 12 or 15 reporters came up to me that day. Not one had ever heard of Leonard Leo. Not one. I mean, it was shocking. You know, here are beat reporters, young, smart, aggressive reporters covering the Dobbs, maybe they were gathering strength for the reporter back in the office who was putting the story together, but they had never heard of Leonard Leo. And I mean, he's been behind the curtain. The Bari Side money got him out from behind the curtain. At that point, people went, whoa, 6 Supreme Court justices to his name was not enough. $1.6 billion. Oh, this is somebody we need to report on. And so since that time, there's been a lot of very good reporting. I would say the best is Heidi Presbala.
Yeah, Heidi's great.
Political. She's done some very good, that moved the ball forward.
And at a great personal cost. So talk about like the cowardice of that man at the New York Times. Is just, my future in-laws, right? I can't report on this threat to democracy, even though that's my job. Literally in the Constitution, I'm supposed to do this.
Right.
Anyway,
the other thing I was going to say,
she had to protect her family because the threats come out that what you're terming Catholic mafia, but it is this protective sphere around these ideologues, these extremist ideologues in their whacked out version of Catholicism and collapse and degeneration of the separation of church and state. They're just zeroed in on really destroying that part of our democracy first and foremost, in my opinion, so that that they can have their caliphate. But this, you know, that the threats are on her life and her family,
Right.
coming from this Catholic group, this extremist.
Well, it's basically there's an infrastructure. I mean, basically the same thing happened when people tried to expose the pedophile priests. I mean, there was basically protect the church, protect the church. It's all circle the wagons and protect the church. What's happening here in DC is there is a Catholic mafia. I mean, Kevin Roberts, the cowboy Catholic, is very much, if not, you know, Leonard Leo says, "I'm not Opus Dei." He gives tens of thousands of dollars to Opus Dei. A big picture, a huge portrait of his daughter, who passed away a number of years ago. She had spina bifida. Hangs over the entrance of the Opus Dei office downtown. His kids go to the Opus Dei high school here in DC. He accepts awards and gives speeches at the Opus Dei. If he's not Opus Dei, he's definitely a fellow traveler and absolutely a mole and freaking adjacent to Opus Dei. Same thing with Kevin Roberts at the Heritage Foundation. The Heritage Board kicked out Jim DeMint unanimously, and then decided to hire Kevin Roberts. Another person who didn't make the final cut at Heritage was Mick Mulvaney, who was an open and public Opus Dei. So clearly they were looking in the same pew when they were trying to figure out who they were going to put in charge of this. And you know, Roger Severino is who he and his wife are son. Roger told me, my parents, he's Colombian. My very devout Colombian parents are worried that because Carrie and I are so devout, they think we're in a cult. Now, I don't know if that's Opus Dei or People to Praise or something else, but he's definitely in that extreme far right wing aspect of Catholicism. The only justices he put on the Supreme Court are far right extremist Catholics. You could argue about Gorsuch. He was raised Catholic, now apparently attends an Episcopalian church, which is basically Catholic light, and he certainly has
it's a little different than that, but yeah. My father was an Episcopal priest.
Well,
so.
I grew up high church Episcopalian. I was an altar boy. Right. So anyway, the point is, there's been a lot of media about the evangelical Christian nationalism. What I'm talking about is Catholic integralism, which is 150, 200-year-old ideology. It's what was behind Franco's Spain. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the conservatives back in the old day, William Buckley and Pat Buchanan, various people have great praise for Franco. What they're trying to establish here is a Christo-fascist theocracy with Opus Dei far-right Catholic rules.
It seems so. I mean, it's not even open for debate, really. It's they're doing it proudly. It's sort of the one thing they're out and proud about. I don't know about the rest of it, but they're, it's all on paper. It's all in writing. It's all happening from the court, from the justices themselves. They're putting it in there. I had a question I wanted to ask you, Tom, about, since you were in that, around those folks that are saturated in that, the line domestic supply that it wasn't Amy Coney Barrett, Greg, that put that into the Dobbs decision.
I think it's a quote. It's domestic infant supply.
Domestic infant supply.
But there, I think it was Alito, maybe it was her. Somebody, they were quoting something else.
But to put it into the decision and have the justices be writing that in, right? Even if it's in the notes, it struck me when it happened as oh boy, there's a worldview being expressed that they feel safe enough to express that about the Christo-fascist state and seeing citizens, and there's a eugenic thing going on here with this as well, but seeing the citizenry, right, as just parts of the machinery of keeping a nation prosperous and growing as a number, as a supply chain, right? And that's like instead of acknowledging the humanity of the individuals, right? And the life of a mother, all this stuff that was being stripped and worn away with that decision. So it struck me that to be that comfortable to just like put it down in writing and slip that phrase, that semantic out there, is something that they have been talking about in their bubble, in their little private whatever, must have been for years and years and years, to just talk about human beings this way.
Well, I think what's happened, and this, I hope I don't get in trouble for using this analogy, but I grew up in the 60s. I was in college during Vietnam and Black Power and all of that kind of stuff. And it reminds me a little bit of Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud. Basically, a group of people were pushed down, felt victimized, felt abused for many, many years. And it came to a point where they were saying, I'm just not going to take it anymore. And I think that's what has happened with the Leonard Leo far-right Catholics.
And they're the most privileged citizens around, with billionaires funding them. And they really they do have a victim complex. It's just insane.
The first month I was at the Becket Fund, which is a very Catholic organization. I was like, "What's the deal? You guys are rich. You've got billions of followers. You've got property all over the world. Why are you victims?" And one guy who's still at the Becket Fund told me, "You have to understand, all religions have victimhood baked into their DNA from the early days. And they think it's only 1, 2, 3 steps away before the bad guys are at our door persecuting us again." And so the halls at the Becket Fund were lined with cartoons from the 1800s, the publications from the 1800s depicting Catholics as, crocodiles invading the country and that sort of. Victimhood is absolutely part of their DNA. Some people more than others, but definitely this far right Catholic mafia in DC. So
they feel comfortable being just out with all of this.
Well, now they're out and proud. It's like
out and proud. But
it's in your face evangelism.
I don't think she invented that phrase or that thinking. What I'm trying to get to is this. It felt to me like it landed on me like, oh boy, they've been talking about human beings this way forever, right? And it was like, okay, now we're going to share with you how we see human beings. It's
definitely it's Handmaid's Tale stuff.
Correct.
Yeah, this is the view. Women are there to produce workers for the machine.
Workers for the machine, soldiers. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever.
We're cattle. We're cattle.
I want to interject just for a minute, just to be clear. And I know, Tom, you've made it. You've used the caveats, but when we're talking about radical Catholics and Leonard Leo in these groups, we're not talking about all Catholics. We're talking about a very small minority of very far right extremist, what I call weirdo Catholics. Having grown up Catholic and gone to church pretty much every Sunday until I was 18, these people are not based in any sort of Catholicism that I know. And if you go into
the polling is that 30% of American Catholics, Catholic bishops and so forth, oppose the Pope. And Leo in that group is in that group. So about 30%. Some people would call them rad trad Catholics. That's an imprecise thing. Some people say, well, if they're not doing the Latin Mass, they're not really part of that. I don't know. But about 30% oppose the Pope. 70% of American Catholics are in favor of the Pope. And Mary Jo McConaughey, who's written the book called Playing God on the U.S. Catholic bishops, says most Catholics do not know what these Catholics, or the right-wing Catholics, are doing in our name. So yeah,
I think that's the key point. I think it's an embarrassment to them, but also it's counter to everything that I learned in church. I mean, they I've said this before on the show, but they want to. The whole idea of Catholicism, as I understood it growing up, is you're supposed to help people. You're supposed to help the poor, the sick, the needy, and the vulnerable in society. And they manifestly do not do that. I mean, in any way, shape, or form. So
it's important to note. It's important, FDR, basically, I've talked to you about this, Greg, that basically you've got rich billionaires funding evangelical foot soldiers, the infantry, and then the Catholics kicking the goals, putting the scores on the board. Basically, what they want to do is wipe out all the social and societal gains of the 20th century. FDR, there was a Catholic against FDR, Coughlin, who most people know. But there was also Catholics that were very much in favor of FDR and put in the New Deal and Social Security and rights to unionize, all of that sort of stuff that the Leo bunch is now trying to steamroll. Also LBJ with the Great Society and civil rights and voting rights and all that stuff. They're basically trying to undo the 20th century and go back to the Gilded Age when rich people could, the oligarchs were building railroads and doing all the stuff that they were doing, but there was no regulation and there was no taxes. And the first federal regulation came in the late 1800s to regulate the railroads. And there's been a expansion of the federal government regulating our air, the medicines we take, the waters that we drink, national parks, you name it. There's federal regulations for reasons to protect this society. These guys want to disappear it all.
Yeah, they don't want any check and balance on them whatsoever. Whatever they want, they're pirates. So I want to bring this up here just real quick, just so everybody has this. There's more to Harlan Crow than just I'm in this because some of the stuff that he benefited from that Thomas has ruled on has to do with tax, right, stuff. There's more to him than just I don't want to pay taxes. Right before we went on air, because I got into I used to be in that offshore leaks database nonstop and talking with those folks at the ICIJ and the offshore leaks database. So there's a site that you can go on. There have been these big leaks. People remember the Panama Papers leaks. There was a Paradise Paper leaks. There's all kinds of offshore leaks where these investigative journalists, a consortium of them, will get their sort of hands on and be able to expose a network of offshores, which is the most opaque way to sort of hide money. The reason why people have those offshores, first and foremost, yes, it's a way to hide illicit gains, but for a lot of folks, it's just a way to not pay taxes. It's a way they can get around any nation's tax structures. So they're beyond the reach of regulations on their money that they have already made, and beyond having to be a contributing member of society and like the rest of us are called on to be and have to be. And it's basically theft if you really look at it in and of itself. So I found all of Harlan's, not all of them, but a good, because I'm sure he's got fake names, but a good number of his offshore networks, financial networks. And it is many that would come under his company's networks and tied into his wealth. I'm still looking for his yachts. Usually I find the yachts in there and I can trace back whether or not that yacht actually has a co-owner or anybody on that title, that yacht that might have a foreign name, be foreign born. I look for stuff like that in these databases. But just so everybody know, you can go in there and you can look at it. I posted it and click around and see all that. This man is not worried about not paying taxes. He has had for decades, as set up by his father, a very elaborate and intricate offshore network of tax shelters through which he can spend his money, because it's real estate, it's a luxury item. He can do whatever he wants in this U.S. We don't have regulations around any of that, even so he can hide all his money, not pay any taxes, and then use it at will. it's not about taxes for Harlan Crow, is what I'm saying. So something else. It's about his agenda, and his goal is something else.
Interesting to think about. Okay, we got to move on to topic 4. Tom's going to stick around.
Topic all right, 4. I'm putting the timer on.
Thank you, Tom,
for all of that.
Put the timer on. Now we have to hew to the 8 minutes, Tom. We gotta be okay. So Rebel Without a Clooney. What is this all about? George Clooney wrote a letter. I think he did it, without consulting with Rusty or Tess, and I think maybe he should have. So we were talking about this a little bit, LB. What's your take on all of that? Like, give some background on this. Yeah.
Well, I was so glad that Mika, every once in a while, I do watch Morning Joe. I watch it for Mika. I got to be honest. I just think she's great. So when this they were covering, I think it was this morning, maybe it was yesterday morning, must've been yesterday morning. I don't know. I have had a week that you can't even imagine of going here and there. But when the letter first dropped, and her comment on it was, she just was like, oh, come on. He didn't write that letter. I mean, he wrote the letter, but there's no way he wrote that letter without checking with Barack Obama. So she said it, not me. I think the point and the takeaway of that is, from what I have observed, this is not an individual I know or have worked with or for in screenwriting in any capacity, but from what I have observed, this is a very careful, very informed person. George Clooney, and very intelligent, and very he's curious, and he seeks to learn about things that are political and from foreign policy to domestic actors. He spent quite a lot of time developing, and I thought filming. I don't know what happened to it. As everybody has been asking for, where is that documentary on Jim Jordan? So he gets into detail. His father was a journalist. It's just, I don't perceive him to be an individual that would put his name on something without placing some calls beforehand to some very powerful friends of his. I just can't, I can't see him doing that without, but I could be wrong, without reaching out and getting, he does have access to Barack Obama. He does. So the question is, would he have written that in a silo, or would he have, before he wrote it, say, what the fuck is going on? What do I need to do? How do I need to do it? And so all that being said, he's an actor and a director. Like, fuck off. Like, what are you doing? This is a terrible moment to assert your power as a celebrity, to try to knock off a guy that literally is we're too late to switch. Like, it's like you're wrong on something. So who's giving you this information? Where is this coming from? Who really wanted you to put that out there? If it was him and he was just like, no, I got to do it for me, because he's so agitated by all the the media screaming, just watching, it on a loop, and, I don't know. So I definitely think there's more to it. I'm glad she said that. I think whoever it is and whatever it is and whatever, I have to say to all of you, get your shit together. What are you doing? What are you doing? So either they know something that no one else knows, or this is as reckless as it gets, is my take on it. You had another take on it, Greg.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's unknowns about the entire situation, obviously, but I feel like, first of all, not everybody that thinks that Biden should step down is a bad actor or on something. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
Friends of mine think that, there's people think that it's a rational thing to think. I get it. I think people saw the debate and freaked out, and that's why they think that. And
they're just freaking out. Yeah.
I don't think it comes from a place of Biden's doing a bad job. I think they are just afraid that he's going to deteriorate to the point where we're going to lose. I think most of it comes out of that. But I also think that, this wedge that is now formed in the Democratic Party is absolutely being amplified.
Oh, yeah.
There's no question about that.
Talk about our enemies drooling, our adversaries drooling. What a gift.
Yeah, it's just right there. It's right in front of you. And I don't know, what the purpose of it is. I don't know. The media clearly is on the side of chaos. The media seems to be on like vulture. They're like vultures circling an old man. It's a distressing, cruel kind of thing. And Tom, you were saying before about the pack mentality of the DC media. You know more about the DC media than I do. What's your take on this?
I have a couple of thoughts. The first time I could vote was in 1968 when LBJ dropped out and Herbert Hoover, and then we got Nixon, landslide for Nixon. Second time I could vote was 1972 when Thomas Eagleton was forced out, and then we got Nixon. So I mean, I just from a logistic point of view, it's too late. It's too late to do something. If there was going to be a change, it should have been 6, 8, 10 months ago, something like that. Secondly, these rich white guys, George Clooney and Jon Stewart and Stephen King and Rob Reiner and all this, if Trump wins, they won't be affected at all. They can still live their lifestyles. They don't need to get abortions, and if they do, they'll be able to do it. But the people who will be most affected if Trump is elected in November are people of color, Black people, women. Mostly, what I see is those people still sticking with Biden. So until they change their perspective, I'm not the old story. I'm not changing horses in the middle of the stream. If Biden is pushed out and it's Kamala or someone else, I will vote for them. I will donate what little I have. I will knock on doors. I will do what I can. I mean, I live in a blue bubble. My vote doesn't really count much anyway. But what's concerning to me is the Democratic Party has always been a coalition, and to see this kind of a circular firing squad making things bad 3 months out. We're 3 months out. It just seems insane to me. But let me just say one last thing. I have a bunch of friends telling me I'm wrong, but I've been told I'm wrong before. 15 years I was told I was wrong about Leonard Leo. So I'm used to being wrong, but I don't think I'm wrong on Leo or this. So
yeah, me neither.
Yeah, there doesn't seem to be a grassroots. This is not a grassroots movement. This is a top-down movement. This is a
top-down,
trickle-down, if you will, movement.
Trickle-down bullying.
Yeah, trickle-down bullying. It's terrible, and we're going to address this in the last segment. So, Tom, before we release you, you're wearing a cap there, a baseball cap. So, what is the meaning of that?
This is a cap from Casa de los Niños in Lo de Marcos, Mexico. A couple of friends. I lived in Mexico for 10 years after Leo pushed me out, and a couple of friends of mine there, Patty and David Martinez. They're gringos, Americans. They run a program, an after-school program for Mexican kids in this very small rural town. These kids don't have much opportunity to do, and Patty and David are helping them. And if it's appropriate, I would just say, please look up Casa de los Niños in Lo de Marcos, Mexico. And if you feel like you can donate $5, do it, because you can donate in 50 million places. I guarantee you this one will actually do some good. So.
Wonderful. Well, this is our announcement section, so I'm glad you're going out with a great announcement.
So, Tom, thanks so much for coming on. I know that, for a while you didn't want to make, podcast appearances, and now I think this is the first time you've done a video appearance, in the Leo drumbeat phase of things. So we're very flattered and honored that you came on our show to talk about all this stuff. And
it's all hands on deck. I mean, there's nothing, it's either democracy or fascism, and we got to do everything we can. So
we do.
I don't want to wake up the day after the election going, I wish I could have done more. So
amen.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, and for all what you do. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom. All right, have a good weekend. Thank you.
Have a good weekend.
Okay.
That was great. He's great. He's great.
Tom is wonderful. And if you don't follow him on the Twitters, he basically just tweets about Leonard Leo all the time.
He just tweets Leo. Like he's
a wealth of
reminds
knowledge.
Me of Wayne Barrett, when Wayne Barrett was, really raising the alarm about Donald in 2015 and 2016. And I think he, hopefully not this thing, but he passed away on the day before or the day of Donald's inauguration. And he just couldn't get anybody pay attention to that guy's criminal, that he was the crime family, head of a crime family. Okay. Yeah. Did you have another announcement? Did you have anything you wanted to?
I don't think I do. I think the announcements are, they are what they are.
They are what they are.
The book, the audio book, whatever. Everybody watching this knows now.
Everyone knows now.
Do you have anything?
Thank you, everyone, for subscribing. Hit the like button. Hit the subscribe if you haven't yet. And if you would be so kind to become a member, we promise we'll give you extra content, and also just would really appreciate the support. It helps us keep this little show going that we produce all by ourselves.
That it does.
Just 3 of us, and then a couple of friends that help. That's all we've got.
It's true.
Okay.
It's true. Okay, so
our last segment, we're bringing on another guest.
Okay. And the reason is there's a lot of misinformation out there, I think, about Biden's debate performance and what happened, and about his stutter and what that means. And I think, I didn't know much about it, and I thought it would be a good idea to bring on someone who does.
Thank
so
you.
We welcome Michelle Williams, who's a speech and language pathologist and who has been patiently waiting in the wings for an hour and a half now. So
thank you, Michelle.
Michelle, thanks so much for joining.
Hi, thank you for having me. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
It's wonderful that you could be with it. Tom said the New Mexico thing. So before we get into this is another theme of the show. These shows have these themes that sort of organically happen, we find. So before we get into the Stutter thing, tell everybody a little bit about you and your background and your, how you're an expert in this particular area.
Well, I graduated in 1994 from the University of New Mexico with a master's degree in communication disorders, which is a speech and language pathologist. So it marks my 30th year of practicing. During our graduate school, we have constant, in addition to classes, we have clinical practicum throughout the entire grad school, the 2 years of grad school. And then the first year of practice, we're considered a clinical fellow. So we can't get out there and practice on our own. We're practicing under a licensed speech pathologist. So that's, then I have worked with patients with traumatic brain injuries, with strokes. I've worked in geriatrics, people with dementia, Parkinson's, ALS, many neurologic disorders. I've worked with adults and adolescents with speech and language disorders. You name it, in 30 years, I think I've done it.
So you saw the debate, obviously, and you analyzed and put on Twitter an analysis of Joe's performance at the debate, and you say this is what happens when someone has a stutter is put in a situation like this. So talk a little bit about that. Tell us about what is a stutter, like how does it manifest, whatever you think we need to know.
To a speech pathologist, Joe's performance, what we were watching, that was stuttering. The trained eye, like one of us, could see it immediately. When someone stutters, they can have a variety of characteristics. They may have what are called part word repetitions, where they take the first part of the word and repeat, repeat, repeat. They have whole word repetitions. They're repeating the whole word. They have prolongations where they can't get the word out, but they're voicing the beginning of the word. They have full-on blocks where they're just stuck with they're stuck in their breath. So those are the primary behaviors of stuttering. And then what we saw with Joe were more of the secondary behaviors. Some of the secondary behaviors are some of the they might be facial or body movements. In Joe's case, he does the lengthy eye blink. He's closing his eye, and during that time, you could tell he wasn't fluent at that time. He was stuck. And then he'd open his eye and the word would come out. There are other secondary behaviors like clearing a person's throat. They may contort their mouth a little bit. Most people's secondary behaviors are different and individualized. They learn them themselves. So one time they may blink their eyes when they were younger, and they blink and the word came out. So their brain says, oh, you need to blink every time to get the word out. So then other things that people do are word substitutions. They can't get that word out, and they try, they're starting, they know they're in a block, or they know they're in a stuttering moment, and we're going to use another word. Word substitutions, or they may kind of start talking and then some other sentence will come out. That's called circumlocution. They're kind of talking around it. That's my take on it. I've worked with dementia patients. It's not in my scope of practice to formally diagnose dementia, but speech language pathologists give numerous assessments to assess a person's cognitive and language impairment. So we're on a team that can add and provide the doctor with the data to say if this person is within the normal range of their age. Joe knocked it out of the park yesterday.
Yeah.
And someone with dementia, they lose critical thinking skills. They have word retrieval problems, meaning like naming specifically. What is this? They can't remember what the name of this is. They don't even recognize, this is a really important one, they don't even recognize when they've made a mistake. So they won't correct themselves. They won't self-correct. So we see Joe do all those things. So these armchair quarterbacks calling him having dementia or Parkinson's, they don't know. What were you going to ask, Stephanie?
No, I was going to say, so I did a tweet, I think it was this morning, and then I got in the car, I had to drive. I was like, I have a speech impediment. I do. And it just was, I was getting so frustrated because I paid attention. I couldn't watch much of that debate. I got too frustrated, not with what was happening with Joe, but for a whole other reason of like the lies that were just allowed to just pour out of, right. And then the two journalists sitting there going, oh, I was just like, I can't with this same situation again. But I did go back and watch it. And then I've watched everything that he's done since, especially live, because I think that's an important, critical thing. And also knowing that he wasn't feeling well, that he was ill,
right.
And they gave him some drugs, right? And that you could tell when not only when he hit his groove in the debate, 42 minutes in, but when whatever the extra stressor was in his environment had some kind of alleviation. So the medicine sort of kicking in. And I've had this one, oh, okay, now my mouth is working better, right? And
relax a little
so
bit.
it's more relaxed. So I had a terrible lisp as a child, and I spent a year in speech therapy, but it came with word displacements, and there was like, maybe she's dyslexic because I certain letters. So I had this cluster of things that were all associated with how I was able to get words out. And so I can be very chatty, I can speak very quickly, but I can also just use the wrong word for 30 minutes. And in my brain, I'm really thinking I'm using a different word, and what's coming out, and sometimes I can hear it and sometimes I can't. And, God bless my mother and the folks around me when I was young, and still to this day, of like, you're saying the wrong word right now. It's like, oh, okay, I'm saying the wrong word right now. So that has nothing to do with my intellect.
No.
It's a processing, for me, it's a processing issue.
Yeah. Speech disorders have nothing to do with
nothing to do with intellect. And it's for me, it's not, it wasn't, there were some things that were consistent and persistent, but there are environments and times where it's not. And then I have an eye flutter that I do when I'm trying to work it out. I do a thing with my eyes that I don't even know I'm doing. And people tell me, why do you do that? And I got that my whole life. Why do you do that with your eyes? And I want to go, look, I have a speech impediment. Oh, you don't want to do that. He's not going to stand up there and go, look, folks, I have a stutter. This is happening to me right now. I kind of wish he would have, because I think it would have been better for him and for us and for everyone in that moment. I just find, though, that the willful disregard of that, right? And by everybody that should be educated and informed that's covering this president, just the willful disregard of it. And when you bring it up, it's like, oh, stop making excuses. And it's like, it's just this abuse. It's cruel. It's like, no, this is part of me. You don't get to I don't even know if it's unfair. I don't know what the word is for that. Cruel is all I can come to. And it's just a willful ignorance. No, we're just going to be ignorant because we want it to be this thing, not this other thing. And we don't want to hear you talking about your other thing because, it's not really that bad for you. The fact that he's gone to 81 years old with this job, the most high pressure job in the world, with all the other things that come with age, in the shape that he's in, with this stutter.
And with class and grace.
And still I'm going to get down, we're going to get back up with that attitude.
Yep.
That towards it all, that is the demonstration that he's all there.
Yes. And this has been written about for years. There was a really beautiful article about him in 2020, right before, I can't remember what month, but around the 2020 election. And it talked about his stutter in depth and the things that he would do as a child. He would stand in front of the mirror and recite poetry until he got it right. Then he became the president of his senior class. He overcame so much, even just as a young man. And then now, it was kind of beyond me that the amount of people that didn't realize or claim, not to know that he has a stutter. A really nice analogy for stuttering is an iceberg. So when you're in a stuttering moment or you're speaking, you just see a little bit on the surface, but you have no idea what's going on underneath. Mm-hmm. They are struggling to speak fluently. And so the listener doesn't see it as much. They may see it like in Joe's case, and I don't mean to, speak for him but it's possible that we were seeing these little eye blinks, or we were seeing some word substitutions, but we have no idea what was going on with him under the surface.
Yeah.
And you can completely lose. You are struggling so hard to get to be fluent that you lose your train of thought. You lose what you were saying.
So I think, based on what I saw and the concerns that I had in the moment of watching the debate, anytime, like based on what you just said, every moment is a result of this, it seems to me. Like there's a part in the debate kind of towards the beginning where he just sort of froze, but that's a thing that happens. And especially he's sick, he's jet lagged, he's obviously tired, and he's under enormous pressure. And he's on the stage with this fucking maniac liar.
And they're not doing, and the people whose job it is to manage it have chosen not to do that. So there was a lot that shouldn't have.
Yeah.
You know, you can't put that on yourself. It's like, don't get yourself into this place.
And the media should have immediately, rather than jumping on, he should step down and has, you know, cognitive decline. They should have jumped on the stutter. It's been out there for years. It's, you know, it's beyond me. We know their ulterior motive though. And see, we all misspeak. We all do it. We all can't forget, you know, can't recall words. We all have to look things up on Google. We all, you know, miscall somebody a different name. It's such a human thing to do.
And it seems like the other question I wanted to ask was his voice, because his voice sounds different. But you talked about that too today, about how
you know,
when we age, something in the vocal cords. Well you tell it instead of me trying to remember.
So air is in our lungs and it comes up through our lungs, then through our trachea, and then out of our vocal cords. And they're actually folds. They're folds of muscle. As we age, and the vocal cords move like butterfly or hummingbird wings so fast, and that creates sound. As we age, our muscles get stiffer, and that goes for the muscles in our throat. And so that is why they get stiffer and they lax and they don't move as well. And that is why you see a lot of older people have vocal changes as they get older. And that is Joe's issue, in my professional opinion. He also has GERD. He has reflux, which he takes medication for. That's widely known. And reflux is stomach acids coming up through the esophagus, and it can come up so high that it causes a lot of throat clearing. He clears his throat a lot. That's the GERD, more than likely. And that can also cause your throat to be a little scratchy and hoarse.
Yeah. So like, again,
they're human things that he's doing.
They're human things. And I don't want this to be a segment of just like, oh God, look at, they're scrambling for excuses for it's not that. It's more of a, for me today, I guess this morning, I just had a thing of like, what's it going to take to real people that are shaping the discourse specifically, and our elected leaders, to reel them back from this lane of cruelty that has just been made okay since Donald Trump imitated a disabled reporter and people laughed.
Which should have been the end.
It feels to me, because it's not, look, if there's something we don't know and outcomes, no, he really does have this and and he can't and he's lost.
But they're jumping to conclusions.
Then okay, but short of that, I don't understand why his very real disability is not just backshelved, but black holed, and we can't talk about it or address it, or it sounds like you're making excuses and oh my God, blah, blah, blah. And where it is brought back, no, wait, you need to actually be an informed journalist if you're going to be writing about this, and you need to remember this, where that people are reminded of that is getting shut down in the most cruel way possible, and people are just posting memes and laughing about it. And I don't know what's happening to us, but I do remember a very wise man saying, when Charlottesville happened that we are in a battle for the soul of this nation. And here we're seeing it in a subtler form, but to throw things away for this because we're not going to we can't even have this on the table as something that's part of reality and discuss it so that people can have a context for what they're looking at. And when the biggest election of our nation's life, not of our lives, of the life of this nation, is happening in 3 months.
3 months.
And it's being sandbagged out of cruel ignorance, willful ignorance.
And they don't want to understand.
I'm gobsmacked by it. I'm gobsmacked by it.
It's heartbreaking to me as a person who works with people with disabilities.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking that my fellow human beings can't have more compassion. And it's like you, I'm gobsmacked. And people don't really want to know. They don't want to be educated. When I posted what I did on Twitter, I was a liar. I was speaking out of my scope of practice. I was coping. No, I'm informing. Like you said, if something comes out that it's dementia or Parkinson's, okay, so be it. But that's not what I'm seeing with my 30 years of experience.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
It hasn't been like right after the debate, he went to an event. It was fine. And he's literally been fine since then.
Right.
Like at everything he's done, including like having the NATO leaders and running this incredibly important, high level, fucking complicated meeting when all of the leaders are like, oh no, he's fine. Like all of them are like, no, he knows what he's talking about.
If he was not fine, they would be looking at each other.
Yeah.
Like, what is happening here?
Right.
I mean, he's answering questions. Just, you know, I think someone asked him two difficult questions. He answered them both, answered the first, remembered the second, and answered them beautifully. Someone with dementia can't do that.
Right. Here's the other thing. Is I get that the folks like the George Clooney, that camp of elites who have the platforms and are using it to say he needs to step aside. I get that what they're not saying he can't do the job. What they're saying is really the subtext of America's so goddamn stupid that they're going to see that, whether it's stuttering, whatever it is, and they're going to not vote for him because of that. So what I would say back to those people is, and then use your platform, like we're using our platform right here and right now, as small as it is compared to theirs, to inform people about what they were actually seeing.
Yes.
That's the solution. Instead of saying, he's got to go, right? Because he can't, if this is going to happen, he can't win. Well, this is going to happen. He has a stutter. This is going to happen.
You know, when, you know, we're on Twitter, and it can be fun to get a big tweet, right? It's kind of a dopamine injection. Yeah. But I
go back on it.
Was so happy that my tweet got as big as it did for information. I was just like, thank God it's that people are seeing it. That was the best for me. I had so many people say, thank you for telling us. Why isn't MSM contacting a speech pathologist? Yeah, they've contacted a neurologist, but a neurologist knows very little about stuttering. Speech pathologists work with swallowing function. They don't know. I've educated so many doctors in my day. I had a physiatrist that I worked with one time, who a physiatrist is a doctor of rehabilitative medicine. He said, you're the expert. I got 15 minutes of swallowing training in med school, 15 minutes. You're the expert. So you got some really good doctors out there who do pass things to us that are our specialties. But it's just heartbreaking that MSM is just overlooking it. And I know somebody saw my tweet.
I know. Yeah. Let's Let's, if everybody wants to find it, you can put, let's tell them what your Twitter handle is so that they
It's
can, and then the player will put it up.
Yep, it's at End the Misery 1.
And the
End
misery,
the Misery 1.
and then the number 1.
Amen to that. Yep.
Okay.
Amen.
Wonderful, Michelle.
Thank
So
you.
go there, look, amplify it if you haven't already. I'm going to go do it.
Thank you.
The last thing that I have to say about this is, it, as a disability, like, what would these people have done with FDR in the wheelchair? Like, would they be like, well, we can't have a guy in a wheelchair be president. What? He can't walk. What? We need to project strength. Like, what are they going to say about that? Would they say the same thing? Because that's one of the, 3 best presidents we've had, and he won World War II. He beat the fucking Nazis. So
What about RFK with the brain worm that ate a hole in his head, in his brain? Did you guys know that?
Oh, we know. Yeah.
We know about the worm.
Yeah.
And maybe that's maybe a disability you can't recover from. But
his voice, I mean, he has a hole in his head.
Yeah.
That doesn't grow back. He's got a neurogenic voice disorder. We've heard his voice. And they're not saying anything about him.
No.
I don't know. Maybe they are, but I haven't heard it.
No,
that's just us. Yeah, for my lecture of cruelty.
It's just
I can stand that
Democrats eat their own, and I don't know. George Clooney, they figured out how to steal all that money from that Las Vegas casino. I think they should figure out how to, pivot this to the right way that we have to.
Well, they need Steven Soderbergh, clearly.
He needs Steven Soderbergh. He needs Elliot Gould.
Soderbergh.
Yeah.
Calling the wrong guy.
Yeah. So Michelle, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I really, especially on very short notice. So I'm glad you were around, and I'm glad
I'm old and bored on a Friday night.
Yeah. We appreciate you. We relate.
Yeah, we know. So we have a way that we end the show. And the way that we end the show is with a saying. And LB, what is the saying?
We're going to get through this.